Hello, it's your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Here I'm joined by a large group of people: Andy Worski, Aydin Paladin, Coach Red Pill, Jean-Francois, and Braving Ruin. And we're here to talk about the skeptic community primarily on the internet.
Nobody can pronounce JF's last name.
I know.
Gariapia.
But I think one of the things that's helpful to start with is Murray Rothbard, in his Death Wish of Anarcho-Communists, wrote, "It is no crime to be ignorant of economics, which is, after all, a specialized discipline, one that most people find to be a dismal science. But it is totally irresponsible to have a loud and vociferous opinion on economic subjects while remaining in this state of ignorance." I think if we juxtapose philosophy and religion for economics, that describes the skeptic community on the internet fairly well. And I think that's one of the long-standing problems that has bedeviled them since, I don't know when they got online. I know they're a distinction of the New Atheists, which got big around 2001. But, Braving, you and I, we had a discussion on your channel a little while ago about some of these problems with the sort of viability of the skeptic community. You want to maybe talk about some of that?
Well, I mean, this didn't really come up in our previous discussion about it, but something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that the chief disagreement that skeptics or anti-SJWs and just to be clear, somebody actually requested on Twitter that we define what we mean by skeptic when we say skeptic. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys what I mean. I'm referring to the sort of like general crowd of anti-SJW, like anti-progressive type of YouTubers, like, like channels talking about feminism and Black Lives Matter and crazy college students and these sorts of things, where it's a very kind of not reactionary, but I would say reactive, like a response to these sort of things. But it doesn't really go any deeper than that into like political philosophy or the science behind any of this stuff or any of these kinds of things. So it's sort of like what I'm thinking of is like the wrecked feminist kind of channels or like atheist channels or these sorts of things. But I just got a little off track there. What I was going to say is that I think the main disagreement between so-called skeptics and so-called SJWs is matters of free speech and being allowed to say offensive things. And then when you start looking at it a little more deeply and looking at what their social, political hang-ups, do's and don'ts are, they're really not all that different, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would second that as well. I think that deep down a lot of I think a lot of the core beliefs, because a lot of this is they define themselves as classical liberals, and it's just that the SJW types kind of take some of the same beliefs and take them to their more logical, but I think the antis view that as the extreme conclusion or as an illogical conclusion. It's just based on your perspective of where this line of thought ultimately is supposed to lead.
Well, yeah. One of the things is it's an actual fact that, say, around 2011, 2012, these were the same people. This was around Elevator Gate, when I forget her name now, but she was propositioned in an elevator and she got all butthurt with the feminist side, and then Dawkins made fun of her on his own website, and that started a split. And then you had Atheism Plus coming up, and they started turning against each other. I think what kept them together was a perceived shared threat of religious people on the internet. And once that perceived threat disappeared, they then started. It was an alliance of convenience, like the Allies in World War II. And once the Nazi threat was removed, then they start turning against each other.
Well, this is inherent to all in-groups, basically, though. Like, as long as there is an enemy to fight, cohesiveness between you don't get the same type of infighting because you're facing a greater threat, which is why there's arguments that, of course, the human race will always be split into many different subgroups, races, different ideologies, until there is some greater threat that, for some reason, would unite all of humanity. It's impossible for me to imagine a situation where all people would come together under one ideological umbrella, even with maybe an external threat outside of it.
Yeah. One of the things that Braving and I brought up on the stream that we did a couple of weeks ago is that they seem to be, the main criticism they have of the progressives is they're moving too fast. And they seem to have a difficult time articulating a coherent response to these progressive outrages. It's like, well, you're just moving too fast, or you're moving too far. It's like, but we're definitely okay with the general trajectory. But that isn't really going to stop the attacks on Jordan Peterson, or, white people shouldn't be allowed to do X, Y, or Z because, institutional racism.
Mm. Well, I see what you're all talking about. Like a lot of channels, I'll even say myself included, like direct feminist or whatever, anti-progressive channel. I obviously don't go too deep into politics. However, first of all, there's obviously the entertainment aspect of it. People enjoy the videos, blah, 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 right? And then there's the second thing where a lot of people who used to be super progressive or fucking just irrational, far left or whatever, have seen my videos and other people who do very similar content to my a video, and it's sort of like the introduction to stop being a fucking idiot. And the reason I don't go too deep into politics hardcore, obviously, first of all, I'm Canadian, so I don't know too much about American politics. But also, I feel as if I'm not qualified enough, obviously, to be speaking about it. And I mean, I have beliefs and stuff. And if you want to challenge me on that, on my beliefs, that's totally fine. I'm down for a discussion, and I'll try my best. But my channel isn't really focused on that because I'm more better at taking videos and ripping them apart. Sometimes I'll have a more serious video. I'll jump into something more political. But obviously a lot of the things I talk about are what you guys are saying is the problem of the skeptic community, which is not everyone is, doing research papers or breaking down science or anything like that. Any books or research papers, articles, whatever. And yeah, that's my point of view. And I agree with. And also, there's a lot of good channels out there. I'm not bashing channels that do that. I enjoy them, and I feel when I listen to like a Jordan Peterson lecture or an Aydin Paladin video that's more detailed and breaking something down, I really enjoy it, and a lot of it I'm learning a lot, right? So, but for me to be a presenter in that sort of and pretend, oh, I know all these things or I've done enough research for all these things, it wouldn't be true to who I am and why I don't make videos like that. I prefer just having a fucking laugh.
I think that's,
right. I think that's good.
Yeah. Is these people, they claim to be authorities and experts when they're really not. Like, if you know you're not and you're not pretending to be one, well, that's one thing, right? When you're pretending to be that way and you can't back it up and you don't have the evidence or the skill, that's where we get the problems.
Right. Yeah. I think I should probably clarify that I don't really have a problem with a channel like Andy's, or say like Bearing is another example, where it's clearly for entertainment purposes, and the person the person isn't trying to pass themselves off as like an intellectual or a scientist or some kind of big brain genius or something. I don't really that doesn't bother me. I don't care about that. And I like to do videos like that sometimes too. I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't think anybody cares about that because it's so self-evidently true. I mean, Andy,
right,
for example, or Barry, to talk about somebody who's not in the room so we can talk about it objectively and not put anybody on the spot, right? Bearing is just, having a laugh and taking the piss out of these people, right? And nobody's going to say that, oh, Bearing is an intellectual, and so why didn't he argue about, like, I don't know, the metaphysics of whatever? Nobody's ever going to say such a thing. It would be absurd because that's not his role or his function or as he presents himself to be. But what is just hilarious is when a few people, a few skeptics, and we're not going to name names, but a few skeptics posit themselves as experts on something, and then they go off and talk about that thing in a cringingly embarrassing way. I mean, I don't know if we want to be naming names on that particular issue, but I think we all know who I'm referring to, right?
You can name Greg. It's so beyond. No. Come on, we're past okay. Just call it Greg and Greg.
To jump off that, Coach, one of my friends, his channel's pretty small, but he's a Catholic. His name is Mathoma, and he's been trying to go around debating these people because about 2 months ago, me and a few other Christians were invited to Mouthy Buddha's stream to discuss with Mouthy Buddha and a guy named Holy Kool-Aid about why are we Christians? Why do we think skepticism isn't really a good answer? And we got a lot of people watched it. A lot of people thought it was a good stream. And Matham has been trying to debate these people. He's been like challenging them on Twitter. None of them respond. They're all a bunch of cowards. I mean, I guess he did really good in the stream, and they don't want to get whooped by it.
Well, no, but also there's the other issue, the obvious issue that I at least have been guilty of it sometimes, is that when you see somebody like a smaller channel that's sort of like trying to get your attention, you're like, oh, he's got very few views, so I'm not going to waste my time with that particular viewer. And I have to admit it shames me to admit it, but I'm a fairly small channel. But there are channels that are smaller than mine, and when somebody like that tries to, you know, get my attention and get me into a locked room in a locked cage to fight him, I'm like, why am I going to bother? You know, it's not going to be worth my while, and so I pass. You know, and so I think a lot of people do it like that. But what's interesting is that, see, some of these bigger channels, and we're talking like, for instance, in this specific case, we're talking about Armored Skeptic, who made a complete and utter imbecile of himself with the postmodern stuff that he talked about. He got taken apart by a whole bunch of very big YouTubers, and you know, he's just vanished from the scene insofar as that particular topic is concerned, because yeah, it was just embarrassing. And I think that one of the problems is that, you know, what Aydin was saying before, that when you have you know, you have the whole in-group thing, that when you have a common enemy, everybody's like joined together. But when you don't have that common enemy, then you start sort of like, as a group, start falling apart. It seems that the skeptics at this point are falling apart over the issue of like, feminism has been defeated. Right?
On YouTube.
On YouTube.
Yeah.
On YouTube. Yeah. I mean, nobody really takes them seriously, and the few channels that are out there are piddly. I mean, everybody talks about like Riley Dennis, and how many subscribers does Riley Dennis have? Like 20,000 maybe? I mean, his views is, you know, it's not that many subscribers compared to Andy's or any of the other YouTubers that are on our side of the political divide, as it were. So, you know, it's sort of like pointless to go there, and so it's like a lot of skeptics seem to be looking for a new enemy, and I think that I think on the alt-right, which I think is crazy.
Okay, because look, it was a very easy. If you look at the history of how this has evolved over the last 8 years on YouTube, at first it was going against. Really, I mean, let's be honest. I'm not saying, and they weren't the most robust arguments, right? They were not going at, like, actually going after real theology and questions of philosophy, but after flat earthers and young earth creationists. I mean, which ideas which are you know, pretty easy to debunk by or at least to come after with very little research acumen.
Right, and the thing,
and then it was out of that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, out of that, because of the split with Atheism Plus, immediately came the feminism thing. So it was an obvious move to do that. And now it's sort of like, because it would seem maybe that the alt-right is the obvious move. But unlike debunking wage gap myths and unlike debunking flat earthers, debunking the alt-right is, you're talking about people who read the research, who can debate these topics in an actual robust and intellectual fashion.
Well, not only that, but they have serious, real concerns that are, you know, obvious. You know, they're right in front of everyone's faces, and in fact, some of the same concerns are shared by so-called anti-SJWs or skeptics. So, you know, so it seems almost counterintuitive to me, where to me it seems like the so-called alt-right and the so-called anti-SJW should either kind of leave each other alone or work within the common ground that they have, or something. But you know, to be at each other's throats seems kind of silly to me, to be honest.
Well,
I think it's just we need a new enemy.
Is there
it's like
is there a big
say,
wave? Is there a big wave of someone attacking someone like right now? Like what exactly?
Well, I mean, I've seen that there's been like this just very
Sorry, Aydin, you cut out there.
People as you're alt-right. People to somebody that you're alt-right. That means like you can't be spoken to. You need to be outcast. I've seen this happen.
Oh yeah,
to Brady run a little bit. Like, you know, you're a bad naughty snack. You're not to be spoken to.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. Is like, obviously, I'm going to be biased because this was something that happened with me back in the day. But more recently, the most recent example I can think of is No Bullshit getting accused of it a lot, not just by progressives and SJWs, but also by, there's a small anti-SJW channel called Hey, I Think I'm Real, or something like that. That's the name of the channel. And he was saying all this stuff to No Bullshit about how he should be like essentially bullied out of the community, and like everyone should dogpile on him, and you know, he has disgusting views that shouldn't be tolerated and this and that. And to be fair, Ranting Monkey called him out for it. Ranting Monkey disagreed with him and said, you know, he shouldn't be bullied off of YouTube or anything like that. But there are.
What's that, Andy?
Oh no, I was gonna say because I noticed the other day everyone was dogpiling on him, and I'm his buddy, so I had him on my show and we were hashing out all the criticisms towards him. He handled it well. It was like,
you know, sorry to interrupt, but can you fill us in as to what the fuck happened? Because I missed this this series of events, and I'm kind of curious, and you're a disinterested observer, so you could fill us in as to what's what.
Yeah, it was. Well, I have noticed the past maybe like a month or so, No Bullshit has said a few things to people on Twitter, and then blocked people who were criticizing him. And then obviously people just started piling on, and it just grew and grew until a few people made videos about him recently, sort of attacking his character, his debate style, all that stuff. And I mean, it's fine. People can have criticisms of people. I don't mind that. But then it sort of felt like a dog pile, so I let him on the show and sort of vent everything out. And then I questioned him hard too. I wasn't like softballing him on anything, and it wasn't to corner him. It was, this is what everyone is accusing you of right now. So I definitely gave him that platform to at least speak, because I think like even people bashed Roaming Millennial for having Richard Spencer on, and I'm like, why? Like, why are you bashing her for having Richard Spencer on? Like, okay, don't agree with him if you like don't want. That's totally fine. But what? So we can bash feminists or whatever, SJWs, Black Lives Matter, no problem. But the moment we're gonna either debate someone or interview someone or open a platform, it's bad. So I understand that point of view.
Right. I mean, here's my thing is like, even if No Bullshit actually were quote unquote alt-right or a racist or whatever, whose place is it for anyone to deplatform him or deny him the ability to say those things if he wants to? Like, I mean, I'm not saying that he's any of those things, but even if he were, what would it matter? Like, what would give anyone that right to do that?
And it's so indicative.
It's like with this is what the progressives do, right? They deplatform you. It's like, well, how are you different than the people you're attacking?
Right. I mean, and this is the thing. This is the thing is I think there's a clear division forming where there are some of the so-called skeptics who are committed to this idea of free speech, and you know, they're not going to try to silence people, and they will have the conversation, like Mouthy Buddha. You know, he's been you know, very polite and very cordial and a genuinely open-minded guy in his conversations with me. So there are people like, you know, this is how I would characterize it, is there are like the Mouthy Buddhas, and then there are people who are essentially sort of revealing their power level as like crypto progressives in a sense, where you know, they're actually displaying a willingness to say, oh, well, this person shouldn't be taken seriously or shouldn't be silenced, or everyone should attack them or whatever, because they have views that I don't like, or they said something I disagree with or was offended by.
Right, absolutely.
And it's like a new rift is forming on top of the previous rift with Atheism Plus. That was the first one, and now there's a new one forming because of the so-called alt-right.
I just find it so indicative to me, because this is what we see, and I really do appreciate, Andy, like you talking to No Bullshit and at least trying to hash it out, because yeah, it could be what happened with Mouthy, where there were people actively saying, he's a Nazi, don't talk to him anymore, we have to have his Patreon removed. All of that stuff happened to him. I mean, whatever you want to think about him, that's just bullshit. That's unbelievable bullshit to me, and it's so indicative and hypocritical, because this was coming from the same people who would have said over and over again, how dare you these feminists like Christy Winters, or you know, that whole brain trust, whatever, trying to deplatform people just over disagreements. And they try to frame it as, oh, it's not a disagreement because this person's a fascist, so therefore they're not worthy. But how is that different from saying this person isn't worthy of a platform because they're an anti-SJW?
Yeah, it's different because reasons.
Are creators making like, all right, here's my question then. Is it the fans of these skeptic channels are the ones trying to deplatform him, or is it actually the video creators who are saying this? You know what I mean? Because there's a big difference between like me making a video saying fuck like him for saying that and he should be deplatformed, and a fan of mine watching my video that I was pretty fair in, at least just trying to debate or debunk or something, and then my fan saying that on Twitter or something.
Overwhelmingly, it does appear to be the fan.
Both of these are happening. So I've had both of these happening. Some of the users of YouTube are criticizing me for welcoming people on the alt-right on my channel, but I've also had Jeff Holiday accuse me of that on the Drunken Peasants, talking as if engaging with a human being is wrong to start with if certain human beings are being invited, like Tara McCarthy or the Alternative Hypothesis. So you have a group of people within the skeptics community, and I don't like the word, and I would go back to the definition of skeptics and say skeptics is just not a natural category, and we should never identify as skeptics. There's just too broad of a political spectrum within the skeptics for it to form ever a community. But there are people in the skeptics community who are for abolishing views, who are for not engaging with the adversary, and that's what we see, and that's what I've been the victim of partly. I mean, not a huge victim, because I answer to these people, go do what you want on your own channel. I'll do what I want on my own.
Okay, Jeff, I want to ask you, because I did watch that Drunken Peasants thing, and I'm friends with Jeff Holiday as well. Though, like, I agree with you, you should be able to have anyone else on your channel, whoever you want to interview. But I think what Jeff was sort of challenging you on there particularly was that you didn't challenge the alt-writers' ideas. Like, you sort of just... Yeah, I mean... that was his... I mean, it's fine. It's your channel. You can do whatever you want. For me, I'm personally like, yeah, whatever. If you're going to have someone on and just listen to them, that's totally fine too. But that's what he was challenging you on. I don't think he was saying don't have an alt-writer on. We sort of just like challenge him or whatever.
Well, the problem is when you look at his critique, when you look at it, he strawmans the persons that I've been inviting. Because first, it's not true that I've not been challenging them. I've been challenging the Alternative Hypothesis on his IDs, but not on his facts, because as it turns out, the Alternative Hypothesis is some sort of autistic guy living in the basement of his mother, and he decided to become some sort of a scientist by himself, apparently, and he's right about everything. So I won't challenge him on facts. That would lead me to ridicule myself, and that's where I take issue, which is when you start strawmanning the other side by claiming that they said things that they haven't said, you're already within a form. It's not censorship, but it's a form of aggression, because it's worse than censorship. In the end, you're putting words into their mouth. And as a creator, and I know that you agree with me on there, Andy, but I will still answer that against the general case that Jeff Holiday was making. As a creator, my job is not just to provide a rebuttal all the times. The world doesn't just work by rebuttal. I also have a responsibility to be representing ideas, to be bringing them into video form in the way they really are. And sometimes I will just do that without rebuting.
Well, yeah. You know, one of the things that you pointed out, we see this kind of also deplatforming attitude. Lauren Southern, a few days ago, had that stream with Theron, ContraPoints, Nick Fuentes.
Oh, that shit show. That was fucking hilarious.
Well, the thing is, though, I remember when Theron said to Running Millennials, you didn't even criticize, you know, Richard Spencer, Jared. Well, it's an interview. You're not normally supposed to do that in an interview. That might be proper for a debate. She's like, well, he said you shouldn't do that. I'm like, okay, you're just another pink-haired lesbian feminist at this point. I mean, how is that any different?
Right. I mean, and a parallel I'd like to draw here is that, you know, during JF and Jeff's exchange, if I'm remembering correctly, I can't quote exactly, but paraphrasing, Jeff did kind of get mad at JF simply for talking to people. He used the word talking to. So this is a parallel that we can draw between what happened between Theron and Roaming on Lauren's stream, and also between what happened also between what happened with ContraPoints and roaming, where ContraPoints was essentially there's this it's this weird tactic that they like to do, where ContraPoints essentially went after roaming millennial, saying that, okay, I don't like that you interviewed Richard Spencer, but I respect your right to interview him. However, there's a correct way for you to interview him, and you didn't interview him correctly.
Right.
While at the same time, you don't see Contra reaching out to Richard Spencer and interviewing Richard Spencer in that so-called correct way. So he's not willing to do the legwork himself, but he wants to criticize other people simply for talking to the person.
Yeah, he sounds like a eunuch at an orgy. Yeah.
And so you saw Theron do the same thing to roaming, and you saw Jeff do the same thing to JF. So this leads me to ask myself, what is actually the difference between these people? If they have certain views that are off limits, and they all agree on what those certain views are, and they all have narratives of their own that they like to push independently and in relation to those views, then what is the actual difference between these people?
Actually,
Yeah,
interestingly,
and I would say there's this
sorry.
ongoing meme about Dave Rubin being like that. Dave Rubin letting too much space to the opponents. I've never heard anyone go on Dave Rubin and state like blatantly false things. I may have heard things that I disagree with, but it's not like Dave Rubin has a responsibility to select the views that he shows. To the contrary, his job as an interviewer, and you said it well, an interview is different than a debate. And I fully agree with this. There is such a thing as an interview style, which essentially consists in letting the space to the person you're interviewing so that its idea is best represented. That's what a good interviewer does. And I think people who are criticizing Dave Rubin are forgetting this.
I completely agree. I recently had a conversation. I had two conversations recently. One with somebody whom I completely agreed with, Black Pigeon Speaks, which doing my channel, pushing my channel. The interview with Black Pigeon just went up just now, and the other conversation was with Kevin Logan, the famed Kevin Logan. And what happened was that when I was talking to Black Pigeon Speaks, they were both structured as interviews, just one-on-one. Talking about the issues, talking about different things that we thought or believed in about whatever. And the thing is, see, with Black Pigeon Speaks, I found myself agreeing with a lot of the things that he was saying. And so, of course, it was a non-confrontational. It became like in a certain sense, it became a little bit of a boring conversation because it was a big old love fest because we had so many points of agreement. Whereas with Kevin Logan, there was a lot of points of disagreement, and a lot of those disagreements were thrashed out and explored. But the thing is, see, you can talk to anybody. You can talk to Hitler and the devil if you want to. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them. And even if you vehemently disagree with somebody, I don't see exactly the point of talking to somebody and trying to shut them down. The whole point would be to talk to somebody and understand the motivations for what they think. Because perhaps those motivations are valid. Because I think that this is the key issue here. So much of this stuff of like, oh, you shouldn't talk to him or you shouldn't talk to her or you should question him this way or that way or what have you. I think it's, in a sense, an insecurity about ideas. Because if you're truly secure in your ideas and your point of view and your worldview, you're not going to have a problem with talking to Satan and Hitler. You're not going to have a problem talking to, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus because you're confident as to what you believe in. Right?
It's funny. It's funny that you say that because Contra recently admitted publicly that he's afraid to debate the quote unquote fascists because fascists don't play fair. He's
afraid because he's wrong.
Right.
That's exactly logic, right? Is that why? Because I use logic.
Yeah.
That's precisely what Destiny also said about. That's precisely what Destiny said about why he won't. He likened Ryan Folk to a flat earther because he got destroyed when he talked to him. And it's like, oh, and I wanted to go back to what JF said just really quick. I'm trying to say this for a couple minutes. Is that you're completely right about you didn't go after Ryan Folk's facts, and I think that's something I keep seeing here. It's that they want the statistical data to be, they don't like it for some reason, so they want people to debate. They want people to debate and try to.
For some reason, because they know that the data is against them. That's the reason that they hate statistics.
Well, we can't do that in good faith, and that's what they want. Is they say they want you to go against the data and against the research, and that's you cannot do that logically or realistically. Now you can debate ideas, but you can't. But the data are without emotion. They're numbers. You can't debate data. And I think that's what's being asked. And for people who are trying to argue in good faith, that's not possible.
It's a fascinating analysis, and I think it goes to the underlying reasons why we're talking about all of this and why the skeptics community doesn't make sense. It's that you cannot, if you're a skeptic, essentially you're dedicated toward the search for truth and facts. That's what a skeptic originally meant. And I think there are internal tensions in the left where, oh God, these facts are bothering us, and so we're gonna try to either ignore them or not see them, or we're gonna even contest their truth. And you cannot be committed to facts so hard and then see all those facts that the right is using, and they are using it correctly. And with the years, they've become better and better at not making the errors that old ones would do. And in face of these facts, Sargon of Akkad proposes a very decent response, which is, hey, I have morals, and my morals are different than yours. And even if we agree on the facts, I think that we should live in a society that's just for black people and blah, 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 and that's open to diversity, etc. That's the correct response, and it's the only one. You're not going to win a debunking of the alt-right.
Well, you mentioned the whole thing about like what we call hate facts. Going back to the skeptic community in an off-internet sense, before William Lane Craig debated Sam Harris, people said that because William Lane Craig used logic and facts, they were traps, and that Sam Harris shouldn't get caught in the traps of using reason and logic. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And the other thing too is, we used to actually have liberal leftist interviewers who did good interviews. We had Phil Donahue on the Phil Donahue Show. We had Mike Wallace in the Mike Wallace interview. I mean, these were hardcore, liberals, but they would interview like neo-Nazis, black nationalists, whole slew of people. And, Phil could get snarky from time to time. But overall, though, compared to what we have today, I think
they don't have the intellectual self-confidence anymore. Because that we're talking about, the alt-right knows the facts and stuff like that. No, that's not the issue. The issue is that the facts are breaking in the direction of the alt-right and the right. So the left can't go to facts because the facts are against them. For instance,
but you can still disagree. You can still disagree based on the data. But that's I think that's where the contention comes, is that it means you have to accept uncomfortable facts.
Yeah,
and I keep seeing this.
And that's the problem.
You have to, though. Otherwise, if you don't accept the facts.
I'm not. No, come on. You're preaching to the choir here. But
I know.
The left refuses to accept facts. And so that's why they don't debate us. It was a fucking miracle that I got this Kevin Logan to do an interview.
I was very surprised by that. I enjoyed it very much, by the way.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I was like, I just wanted to pin him down. I felt like a ninja with like all this weaponry, and there was like a little animal in front of me that I just wanted to pin him down and just like nail him to the wall. But the fact of the matter is, I was surprised that the guy actually did it. I mean, I basically sort of like maneuvered and manipulated and semi-bullied him via Twitter into doing the stream. And but who else is doing that? Christy Winters? No. She'll only do some highly structured kind of debate with a very small channel to make sure as to limit the damage, right? And who else is out there? I mean, that's the other problem, of course, is that there's no liberal on YouTube worth a damn. I mean, we're picking. There's slim pickings out there.
Well, so, I also caught Kevin Logan as well, and that was really interesting because he was the only one I'm allowed to be on, who wants to be on. But who would you guys want to debate for alt-right against who? Like who are we talking here? Is there any names? Do you want Armored Skeptic? Like who?
What are you talking about? I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Who would you want to debate?
I'll tell you, Andy. I want Jeff Holiday to talk to somebody like Ryan Falk.
No, screw Ryan Falk. I mean, I'd like Jeff Holiday to go up 5 minutes against you.
But I mean, I'm not. Well, I'm only alt-right, as I Braven, I think you said this to me a while ago, which is that I would be considered functionally alt-right, and I've been called alt-right because I agree on the facts. I agree on the data because I've looked at the data.
I mean, this
So
is
if
the
that
thing.
makes
This is
me
the other
alt-right,
thing.
I guess.
This is the other thing is I don't even necessarily like the term because there are tons of people who are thinking about these kinds of issues and who agree on the facts and don't consider themselves part of that category or don't necessarily agree with solutions or anything like that. And this is the real issue for me is that the whole dynamic of agreeing with the facts or not agreeing with the facts has led to people who are not quote unquote alt-right being accused of being alt-right, and it's become this sort of like slur word, equivalent to Nazi or racist or any of these things. And so I don't really find the term all that useful. I'm just going to talk about what I talk about, and if people want to call me that, that's fine. But
that's one of the problems I find with the skeptic community. The skeptic community is going out of its way, it seems, to use the term alt-right the way the mainstream media is using it as a smear-all and a way to dismiss anybody whose opinions or ideas or arguments that they don't like or can't defeat. And that is really pissing me off because it's just a smear tactic. And the skeptics were supposed to be, my logic and my classical liberalism and shit like that. But at the end of the day, they seem to be like SJWs, and that pisses me off, and I know it pisses off a lot of other guys.
I'll say one thing from my perspective, since I talk to like a lot of people on every side, basically, is a lot of people in the alt-right do have really extreme ideas beyond the actual facts, right? Like, I mean, we can all agree on that, right?
Oh yeah, some of them are nuts.
And it's sort of become, like, to what I see, almost like the good intention versus what the reality is, meaning like feminism. The good intention is women to have equal rights. The reality is we all know what's happened in the past few years, right? Whereas the alt-right, now a lot of you, I've heard a lot of alt-right arguments. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, facts are facts, cool, whatever. However, then there's like a certain group of people who pretty much ruin it for the rest of the alt-right. And maybe it is the mainstream media's fault, or just shining a light on the most extreme figures of the alt-right that say extreme things. So I think it's just left a bad taste in certain people's mouths.
It depends on what your definition of extreme is, because, like, for example, I agree with the facts that predominantly are brought up by the alt-right in terms of, because I do predominantly also study intergroup psychology. So, for example, we know that people tend to self-segregate into people that look and are more kin to them. However, I personally don't believe in the possibility. I believe that an ethno-state for the United States is an absurdity, and I think Coach agrees with me on that. But we get lumped in with that because we agree on the facts, and that becomes an issue in that, it's when you get into what is the absurdity, and maybe it is on some level that our ideas are being misrepresented, but maybe, or the ideas are being misrepresented.
Right. I mean, I agree with you on, if it's all psychology and certain races will group together, I believe that because in high school, for example, all the Asians would chill together, all the Indians would chill together,
right?
So, and then some mixing here and there, but then you have the extreme people who go a white ethno state, and then you're like, all right, look, I'm up to you. I'm with you up to a certain point, and then I'm like, I don't know if it's more of a morality thing at that point. Like,
but if they want to go and do it on their own, if they what I find, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but like, when people get mad of if you're so mad at white people or these ethno-nats for saying that they want an ethno-nationalist state, even if they're not prescribing it for America, if they're saying they want to go to an island, or if they want whatever, they want this state. See, I don't see how that's any different from Japan or Israel. So for me, if you want to go off and do that, I just don't think it's going to work for the United States. But see, this is where the conversation needs to happen, though.
Well, right.
At this level, it doesn't get to this point.
There's something else to highlight here is that even this term ethno state, I really hate it because it's this sort of like this meme that Richard Spencer, who I'm also not a huge fan of. Richard Spencer came up with this meme of like, oh, it's like a future ideal, the eventual goal of communism or something like that. And it's like, dude, stop using this word, because really my view on all of this is that the answer for the United States really is as simple as stop forcing diversity on people, stop forcing integration on people, stop forcing mass immigration on people, and actually allow people to go off, and if they want to live in a particular community with a particular kind of people, allow that to happen, and don't get the government involved in that. Don't forcibly diversify communities with immigration and Section 8 housing and all this stuff. That's really the issue for me. And what's funny about this conversation to me, Andy, is that the whole the example of the school cafeteria where, you know, the black kids are sitting with the black kids, the Asian kids are sitting with the Asian kids. That's exactly the same argument that Jared Taylor uses. So so it really goes to show you how intuitively I think the average person can understand this kind of thing if you explain it in the right way, and if you're not saying these goofy words like oh, alt-right and ethno-state and, you know, this just silly sounding stuff. You know? Yeah,
I think I just think a lot of people on a certain side or section of the community or whatever have that bad taste of the extreme stuff. But I agree with you, like, on the most part. Like, I don't want no mass immigration. I want it to be difficult for immigrants to come in, but I still want it to be fair at a certain point. You know, like, so I have certain beliefs like that too, but I guess the alt-right label has been tarnished for a few. And that's not fair, because now there's people who you know have that mentality or seeing, you know, an alt-righter as this certain type of person, and then they might close down conversations that would actually, you know, you'd find some common ground or disagree or just debate about, right, and see what the audience thinks. Yeah,
right. And
we can't even get to that.
And in addition,
there's a point that Coach made that I want to get at. Coach, you brought up that the left doesn't like the facts. You know, we talked last night about the Russian Revolution. You know, the Bolsheviks hated the facts. You know, when the people didn't line up as the good little communists, they just shot them. and I think that's sort of the danger with the rise of the intelligentsia that we have now. You know, when the Russian Revolution took place, you had decades of these radical leftist intellectuals fomenting revolution. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they ended up usurping the actual February Revolution with the coup d'etat. And another thing to go with, like, hate facts in that Lauren Southern stream, you know, when people like Roaming Millennials and Nick Fuentes were using statistics about female happiness, you know, there's the paradox of declining female happiness in this feminist society. Like, Destiny was like losing it. And like, dude, these are the facts. These are the statistical data of what makes women happy. If you don't like it, well, it's also bad.
It's also sometimes, I think there are some people, like, in that there were several things in that stream that stuck out to me as sometimes what you will find is they're willing to accept certain data. And this is an important thing about the scientific method. You have to be willing to accept all data that that you can, you know, reasonably assume were conducted in a method that is valid and reliable. Whereas, like, he brought up some study where they said that people were less likely to hire people named like Shaniqua and Laquan, and it's like, well, okay, they're also probably less likely to hire someone named Billy Bob. Methodology is very important in studies like that.
And that also turned out to be contradicted by a more recent study as well.
It was, yes, yes, where, and it's all kind, and actually, you know, and I had just done this research recently, which I was talking about in my latest video, and I talked to you guys about the other day, at least Bravian and Coach, which was that we found that since the 1970s, actually, white people have a proclivity and a higher propensity to like black people, potentially out of a pity principle, a function of Goffman's 1964 stigma research. White people just like black people more. They want to like them more. They want to give them things, which is actually not good for black people in the long run, or any minority. But yeah, so it's basically like you can pull. What I could see is that they'll pull up research like that and say, "Oh, see, white people wanted more black people." Well, could you understand the context? Could you understand why, for example, I've seen this one cited a lot, which is that you give someone a resume and it's a male and a female. It's the only difference between the two resumes. Well, we know statistically that women are far more likely to leave the workplace very early, to have children, and not come back. So if I'm an employer, I might be less likely to hire a woman, not because I'm sexist against women, but because I know that I'm going to put in 5 years into training this woman, and then she's going to leave to have a family, and I will have wasted a huge amount of time and money. Mm-hmm. That's not sexist. That's rational.
That's practicality. Yeah.
Something Something else I also wanted to add on to what Andy was saying about how, this whole like alt-right, quote unquote alt-right, whatever this even means anymore. Not only does it shut down the possibility of conversation, but potentially productive conversation by throwing this term around, but I've also seen total misattribution of it, where I've seen people trying to say that Andy is a white nationalist. I've seen people trying to say that No Bullshit is a white nationalist, and that's what these people mean when they say alt-right. It's like, oh, you're a neo-Nazi, you're a white nationalist, or these silly terms that almost nobody actually is. I've seen Sargon called alt-right. So really, it's like, what's the point of anyone even using this term anymore? Like, who would
it's a smear. It's a smear, and it's a smear. And the thing that drives me nuts is that a lot of people on the skeptic community use it as a smear. Hey, V used to tweet at me, basically saying that what I was saying and thinking and my points of view were alt-right. And he was, before he realized that I was Hispanic, he was saying that I wanted a white ethno-state. And that kind of shit, that stays. The fact that I'm still talking about it 2-3 months after it happened, should give you a fucking clue. Because, that kind of shit flinging is just like, it helps nobody, okay? And on top of that, I think that the key issue that all of us agree on is we want the rest of society to understand what is actually going on with a whole host of very important issues, such as mass immigration, such as this what is informally called cultural Marxism, which is ruining university education and saddling all these students with debt and all that. All of us want this to be understood by the wider population. And so when inside in our neck of the woods, there's this internecine kind of like attack, it just drives us crazy. I mean, it drives me crazy, and I maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but I would venture to guess that a lot of other people here are also get pissed off because it's sort of like shooting at each other instead of shooting at the enemy. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. And would you guys say that there's less people in the alt-right who want a white ethno state?
Look, I know,
or more people who want a white ethno state.
Insofar as the alt-right, that's the issue. See, what Aydin was saying, that a lot of people who are alt-right and not alt-right, for instance, myself, I do not consider myself alt-right, and I don't think that the alt-right would consider me a member of their particular group. Okay. We agree on all the facts. I mean, the facts of the failure of multiculturalism, the facts insofar as women and how feminism is just spouting a lot of bullshit. All these facts, we're all in agreement of it. Okay.
Well then, doesn't that go back to my point about like the term feminism meaning well, and now it's been tarnished? So obviously, women like agree that all women should have equal rights. However, a feminism stinks because the name has been tarnished. Don't you think that if there is a really high percentage of people who want only whites in America, for example, in the alt-right, isn't that tarnishing the alt-right name? Therefore, when you are saying, hey, I'm alt-right, it's like saying, hey, I'm a feminist. So people attach that negative connotation to you immediately.
Yeah, but do you hear any of us here saying that we're alt-right? Does anybody here identify and say, I am alt-right?
Well, all right. I'm sorry. I should ask who here would say that they're alt-right?
I almost define myself as alt-right. It's just that I don't put white nationalism at the center of my interest. To me, it's really a 10th priority. So I guess I don't fit by the definition into alt-right, but I identify with generally neo-reactionary thought. So thinking about being on the right and about being a conservative without religion and without the kind of arguments that we had in the 80s and the 90s by a conservative radio host in America. But otherwise, yeah, I define myself as a new type of right and a modern one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm more or less on the same page as JF. I do consider the race stuff as being relevant to politics, but this, again, this term ethno-state is something that's really become a pet peeve of mine, and maybe there are a bunch of people on the alt-right who wouldn't like me saying that, but the way I would summarize my position on the whole ethno-state thing is that I don't think a 100% nation, belonging to any particular demographic in terms of 100%, no one else can be there, no one else is allowed in, and if they are, they're physically removed, I think is a really fanciful and sort of inherently unrealistic idea. But what I do think is that if a country, historically belonged to a particular demographic of people, then I do think that demographic of people should remain the majority in that country. So if you want to say like a country that's 80% one group or 90% one group or whatever is a quote unquote ethno state, then I guess. But this idea of quote unquote the ethno state is this like one group only and everybody else gets kicked out or killed or something is ridiculous to me. So
I see so few people. I don't think I've actually seen almost anyone actually advocate for that. Even more extremists I see say, well, like, skilled workers and such like that would be acceptable. That's
right. I mean,
very far outside.
I mean, even someone like Tara McCarthy, who's often cast as an extremist and this terrible, violent person. I mean, I think she does say things that are a little extreme by my standards sometimes, but her position on the immigration thing is, I think, very reasonable. She and I would agree with this, that the idea of not having any immigration at all, like no one entering the country whatsoever, is extremely unrealistic and would in fact probably be detrimental to the health of a country. But that doesn't mean that you're letting in an enormous number of hundreds of thousands of people every year. There's a reasonable middle ground here where you can have a little bit of immigration and benefit your country and maybe bring in a small amount of skilled workers or something without having to radically alter the demographic makeup of your country. And I think that's a reasonable position to have. But the idea that you're just going to wall your country off from the rest of the world and never interact with the rest of the world is really silly, in my opinion.
How much immigrants is America letting in a year? Like, would you say, or the stats? What were the stats on that? Yeah, like a year. Yeah.
Last time I looked, it was a little under 1 million legal immigrants, I think. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was something like 1 million legal immigrants, and then we don't really know how many illegals, because that's for obvious reasons, that's a dark number.
Yeah, well, my thinking, Andy, has always been the ship of Theseus paradox, which I always talk about. And the paradox is very simple. Theseus's ship arrived in Athens and they picked it up, he was a big hero, and they put it in a museum. And over the years, the different planks of the ship started to rot because, age. And so they would take these rotting planks, and remove them and replace them with new wood. And after, 100 years, 200 years, every single plank, every single little piece of metal and everything on the ship had been replaced by new wood, right? By new linen for the sails and what have you, right? Because all the old stuff had rotted away, right? So the question, is that still Theseus's ship? That's the paradox, right? And it's a big philosophical one, and it's a very interesting one. Now, in my own case, I would say, yes, it is still Theseus's ship, assuming that you're not replacing like all of the planks at one go, and each plank that you are replacing fits in the place that it's supposed to go, and it's not like it's its own separate little thing. It's not like a cancer. Okay. Now you look at
that's why Ryan Falk is pissed off at you, Coach Red Pill. That's why Ryan Falk was not happy with your video, and he called you Coach Captain Black and Blue Pill, because in his view, immigration is not a proper replacement for Western civilization. In his view, the people that we are replacing Western civilization with do not have the same genes. And so to go in your boat analogy, you're replacing it with planks that are not as solid. That's why Ryan Falk was pissed at you.
No, yeah, because he is a real ethno-nationalist. He's a real alt-right. See? Now I can see, for instance, when I went to a pretty decent university in the U.S., and when I went, and this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, right? There were a lot of guys there who were black who didn't deserve to be there. They just didn't, right? And there were a lot of Asians who had to score really high on their test scores to get into that college. Now it's worse. Okay, a lot of Jews, a lot of Asians are not getting into the top slots at the top universities because they're Jews or Asians. There are too many Jews and too many Asians applying to those top colleges, right? Now, is that fair? No. I mean, you say that maybe the planks are going to be replaced by wood that's not as good. What happens if it's replaced by wood that's even better? I mean, not even wood, but replaced by titanium, right?
Well,
Isn't
I mean,
that
I think
better for the ship?
I think the whole point of the disagreement, and I would tend to agree with Ryan on this, is that you're using the analogy of the ship of Theseus, and it's like, okay, so you have a seafaring vessel, you have essentially a machine or a tool, if you will, that's been built for a specific purpose, and you have a part that breaks on it, so you replace that part for the machine to continue functioning properly. You're replacing a part that has to be manufactured to a specific specification that has to fit in a certain way. It has to be a particular size and shape, and it doesn't really matter as long as it's a component part that will work. Or, for another analogy, say you have a computer and one of your RAM modules burns out, you buy a different piece of RAM and put it in there and the computer works all the same. But the real point is that